Sonoma Land Trust is a nonprofit that protects land in Sonoma County for everyone's benefit. We've been doing this work since 1976 and have protected over 59,000 acres in our county during that time. We accomplish our work through the generosity of our members and contributors. So thanks to all of you out there who are helping us protect beautiful Sonoma County for future generations. As we pursue our mission of conserving land in Sonoma County, we recognize that we stand upon the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. We honor their knowledge, care, and stewardship of this special place across the ages and acknowledge the deep and lasting damage that colonization has inflicted on them. We embrace our responsibility to learn from and protect their cultural and traditional connections to the land. We are so fortunate to have two incredibly knowledgeable policy experts with us today to help us unpack what is inside the $10 billion Proposition 4 on the ballot this election. Ariana Rickard is Sonoma Land Trust's Public Policy and Funding Program Manager. She works with state and federal agencies and legislators to ensure that the Land Trust's programs and our projects receive adequate funding and support. Ariana has worked for several government agencies, including the Peace Corps in Ecuador, and numerous environmental nonprofits such as Audubon, California, and is currently serving as the policy chair of the San Francisco Bay Joint Venture. She will be joined by Kim Delfino, the president and founder of Earth Advocacy. Kim provides policy and advocacy expertise to nonprofits and foundations with the goal of protecting and restoring our lands, waters, and wildlife for future generations. Prior to establishing Earth Advocacy, Delfino was the California Program Director for Defenders of Wildlife for 2 decades. Thank you for joining us, and welcome Ariana and Kim.
Thank you, Gina, for that nice introduction. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening to talk about Proposition 4, this transformative $10 billion climate bond. So we are going to go through, okay, and so next slide, Kim. Just want to let you know what we're planning to cover this evening. We are going to talk about Sonoma Land Trust and why we've been engaged in ballot measures in the past, some history there. We're going to share with you some of the public polling that we've already seen about Proposition 4 for the climate bond in California. We're going to share with you some of the messaging from the Prop 4 campaign. We're going to go through the different funding available, the different pots of funding through this Proposition 4. Then we're going to get into the specifics about how this funding will benefit Sonoma Land Trust and Sonoma County. We'll share with you some of the organizations that have endorsed the measure, and then we will take your questions. Next slide. So just a little bit of history of Sonoma Land Trust's involvement with these ballot measures. So why is the Land Trust getting involved with ballot measures? Well, what you'll learn the presentation is the funding provided through these regional, county, and state measures provide us with the money that we need to conserve and restore and protect land in Sonoma County. So starting with Measure F, that was the quarter-cent sales tax that helped reauthorize the Sonoma County Ag and Open Space from 2031. And they are a great partner with us. We have a lot of projects going on with them, working to conserve land in the county. Measure AA was the regional tax measure that was a parcel tax. All the counties in the Bay Area voted on this, and this provided the funding to create the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, which provides money for wetland restoration and public access and other benefits throughout the entire Bay Area. And then there was Proposition 68. This was a statewide proposition, natural resources funding that passed, and we supported that measure. And then finally, Measure M, which is providing funding for parks for the next 10 years. And next slide, Kim. I think you're taking over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Just takes me a minute. I've got 2 screens going. So, okay. So Proposition 4 was put on the ballot after a very long, actually 4 years of work in the legislature to finally advance Senate Bill 867, which was authored by Senator Ben Allen. And it was passed at the end of June, at the very last minute, when you could absolutely went right to the deadline. It was a large coalition effort that led up to the passage of SB 867, which ultimately became Prop 4 onto the ballot. In addition to Senator Allen, the effort was also led by Senator McGuire, who actually signed the measure as the acting governor at that moment at the end of June. Also, Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia had his own climate bond AB Assembly Bill 15. Now I'm forgetting. As soon as legislature ends, my brain purges all the bill numbers. Anyways, Eduardo Garcia had his bill, which was sort of morphed in with Senator Allen's bill. But also want to give a shout out to Assembly Member Connolly and Assembly Members Lori Wilson, who were also strong advocates and important parts of the folks that the whole team of folks in the legislature who negotiated the climate bond. And as you can see, the climate bond is there, $10 billion to prioritize the investment of funds early on in an effort to try to address the effects of climate change in a preventative way and in a proactive way, instead of trying to deal with it on the back end as disasters and problems arise. On to you, Ariana.
Great. And then another thing that we just wanted to point out is, why do we need bond funding for our natural resources priorities and climate resilience projects? The state has facing a budget deficit crisis. So this year, state budget deficit, and $1 billion was cut from natural resources funding this year. We know next year we're going to have another budget deficit that we have to reckon with. So there just isn't the money available through the state budget. And with all our priorities, with our 30 by 30 priorities and the rest of our priorities in our strategic plan, we need that stable, consistent funding for the next 5 years to meet our 30 by 30 goals and our climate resilience goals. So passing this measure is really the best thing we could possibly do for climate resilience in the state, given the current funding situation. And so the polling that has been done so far, this was back in June, asking likely voters if they would support a climate bond. 59% said yes, and it's higher in other interest groups. And even with economic uncertainty, Californians are supportive of funding for climate resilience, because pretty much all Californians have felt the impacts of the climate crisis, whether that's flooding or wildfires or sea level rise or extreme heat. They know that it is better, as Kim mentioned, to do disaster prevention rather than response. Let's see, next slide, Kim. So we just wanted to mention some of the messaging that the Prop 4 campaign is leaning into. This is the messaging that is polling well. So this is what you might see from the campaign. So emphasizing the preventing wildfires, the funding that would go towards that with Prop 4. And then the next slide, clean water. So again, a significant amount of funding to go towards protecting the water we drink. And then the next messaging is really what Kim was referring to, that it's better to invest in prevention than to respond to disasters. So a study found that for every dollar invested to reduce our risk from disasters before they occur, we save roughly $7 in emergency response and cleanup. And we know that that this is really the way to go, is to take care of prevention rather than responding. And another thing that we wanted to highlight for Prop 4 is that it is unique in that it allocates at least 40% of its funding to underserved and climate vulnerable communities, many of which have not received funding in past bond efforts. Next slide. Oh, you're on mute, Kim.
Okay, sorry. I hit the wrong button. Operator error. So I'm going to take it from here and talk about the different buckets of funding that are within Proposition 4. So where there is $3.8 billion for drought, flood, and water supply funding. Half the money would be for activities to increase the amount and half the amount, half this money would be for activities to increase the amount and quality of water available for people to use. It's about 1.9 billion. And that would include storing water so that it could be used during future droughts, as well as cleaning polluted water to make it safe to drink. There'd be money available to reduce the risk of floods and repairing dams and capturing and reusing stormwater. That's about 1.1 billion for all of that. The rest of the money would be used for restoring rivers and lakes, for urban streams restoration, and for wildlife refuges. And I'd also point out that the bond has specific allocations for tribal needs. And so of the funding in the water chapter, at least 50 million can be made available for tribal water infrastructure. Moving on to the wildfire prevention chapter. So there's $1.5 billion for the wildfire prevention projects. All of the money would be going towards supporting activities to improve the health of forests and rangelands and to reduce the risk of severe and destructive wildfires. This summer, we've already seen the impacts of wildfires, and they're battling wildfires now in Southern California. This would include thinning trees, clearing vegetation, and doing restoration. Money would also be made available for activities to help landowners homeowners make their property more resistant to wildfire damage. I'd also like to flag that there is funding in this chapter to support collaborative efforts, such as those undertaken by the Sonoma Land Trust, working with the County of Sonoma and others. There's money to help state parks become more fire resistant, and there's money specifically allocated to the State Coastal Conservancy for fire related activities. There's $1.2 billion for protection of natural lands. This is a significant investment of funds and will help us as a state achieve our goal to conserve 30% of our natural, our lands and waters by 2030. We are close to achieving that goal, but without this funding, we will not be able to achieve that goal. We have more than 1 million acres a year that we would need to protect in order to achieve the goal. Of the 1.2 billion, $870 million would be made available to the Wildlife Conservation Board. This is one of the key agencies that fund projects all over the state to conserve land, restore land, remove dams, create wildlife connectivity, all of the things that we need in order to have conservation on our lands. There's also, like I said, 180 million for wildlife connectivity. And there is a $10 million allocation for tribal nature-based solution grants, which is a new program that the Resources Agency has started. They awarded a round of grants early this year, but they don't have any more money to be able to award grants unless this bond goes through. And I'd also note for the Wildlife Conservation Board, they've actually stopped accepting projects right now because they have over allocated in terms of the need versus the amount of funding available. So again, this bond will be really important to keep going in our natural lands conservation work. There's $1.2 billion for coastal health and sea level rise. Much of the money would go to activities to restore coastal areas and protect them from the effects of rising seas. It's about $890 million. This can include restoring wetlands, such as all of the work that's being done along Highway 37. There's also creating sea buffers to rising sea levels, and the rest of the money would be used to improve ocean habitats and protect fish and other marine wildlife. So a lot of the work would be doing oyster bed restoration, kelp restoration, eelgrass and seagrass restoration. These are all things in that Sonoma would benefit from. Ariana will go into more detail, but there is an $85 million earmark for the San Francisco Bay. And there's 75 million in this chapter for dam removal, which is really important to restoring our native fish. There's $850 million for clean energy infrastructure. More than half of this money would go to support development of wind turbines off the California coast in specific areas that are already going through a planning process right now. About 475 million would go for that. Most of the remaining money would be for building infrastructure, such as transmission lines, and to build large batteries to store electricity where needed. $700 million is going to go towards creating parks and outdoor access. The 300 million of that would support various activities to expand recreational opportunities at parks and reduce the impacts of climate change on parks. This could include new trails and parking areas, also providing grants to local communities to build new parks or renovate existing parks. A lot of the effort is focused on helping areas that are what we consider park poor. And the rest of the money would be used to repair state parks and provide nature education, about 200 million. And these are all, again, critical investments because I think, as Ariana noted before, well, there was additional money in the budget the last few years. That funding has essentially dried up. And if we want to continue to make progress on providing parks, restoring parks, managing parks, this fund is absolutely essential for doing that at the local, regional, and state level. There's also $450 million for extreme heat protection, which I think we can all appreciate. I'm based in Sacramento, and believe me, after this summer, I can very much appreciate the extreme need for extreme heat protection. 450 million, and of that 450 million, 200 would pay for activities focused on protecting communities from extreme heat, including investments in urban greening and urban forestry. 100 million of it would go to support places for people to go during heat waves or disasters. These are programs are called the transformative climate communities, or and so these are places where, like, cooling centers for people to go to. And the rest of the money would provide grants for local communities to conduct activities that would provide environmental benefits, such as reducing air pollution. Finally, the bond includes $300 million for sustainable agriculture. Much of the money, about 105 million, would be used for activities that encourage farmers to improve soil health, reduce air pollution, and use less water. The money would also, about 60 million of the funding, would support community gardens and farmers markets, such as purchasing shade canopies or other infrastructure for farmers markets. The rest of the funding would support a range of other activities. And I'd like to highlight especially the funding that would be used to provide vans to transport farm workers and to provide benefits for farm workers. Ariana, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Kim. So now we're going to go into the specifics for the Bay Area and Sonoma Land Trust. So like I mentioned, the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority was funded through Measure AA, and they provided great matching funding opportunity. So in Proposition 4, as Kim mentioned, there's 85 million set aside for the Restoration Authority to continue to fund projects here. And we are very reliant on that funding. We use it for our Baylands acquisition and restoration projects, such as the acquisitions of Camp 4 and the Keyser Ranch acquisition that we are working on now. And then also in the funding that Kim mentioned, there's that 700 million for parks. And again, that's park creation in areas that have less access to parks, also restoration of parks and access and nature education facilities. And then that 1.2 billion for biodiversity, with 870 million going for achieving our goal, our 30 by 30 goals. And I will talk in a couple slides from now where we are at the state level for achieving that 30 by 30 goal. But that funding is critical. Even though we've made good progress, we still have a ways to go. And then another 180 million for wildlife corridors, which is so essential for these charismatic megafauna like black bears and mountain lions to have the room to range and conserve their species. And then, as Kim mentioned, there's that 10 million for the tribal nature-based solutions. So that's exciting funding. And then next slide. So this is showing the different strategic focal areas for Sonoma Land Trust. So I wanted to go into the specifics of how Prop 4 funding will help us achieve our goals under these 6 buckets, these 6 strategic focal areas. And if you want information about our strategic focal areas, that is all available on the Sonoma Land Trust website. So again, with the 1.2 billion for biodiversity, we have a strategic focal area around protecting biodiversity that looks at our wildlife corridors and our preservation and restoration of lands in Sonoma County. So there's 870 million for wildlife conservation, habitat connectivity, and ecosystem restoration for the benefit of the entire state. So that Wildlife Conservation Board funding is really critical for Sonoma Land Trust. It supported the acquisition of McCormick Ranch and the Sonoma Mountain Vernal Pool properties, just to name a few recent ones where we relied on funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board. And then with our Adapting to Rising Waters, that's our sea level baylands strategic focal area. So again, that's the funding from the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority for acquisition and restoration, those conservation projects. So there's this 85 million for Restoration Authority and 765 million for the State Coastal Conservancy. And then we have the parks. So that's our people, that's our preserving nature nearby. And again, the specific funding, 500 million for parks for neighborhoods with less access to parks and park improvements and public access. Next slide. So the 30 by 30 goal. This is from the progress report that the California Natural Resources released just last week for California Biodiversity Week. So this is the annual snapshot of where we are in conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by the year 2030. So here we are in 2024, we're at 25.2% of lands and 16.2% of coastal waters. So we are making strong progress, but we do need to conserve another 6 million acres in less than 6 years. And scientists agree that in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and the loss of wildlife habitat, we need, at a minimum, to protect 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. So providing funding through Prop 4 helps us address the twin crises we're facing now of loss of biodiversity and the climate crisis. Next slide. So we just wanted to share with you some of the endorsements that have come in for Proposition 4. You can see a nice range of support from labor, teachers, city leaders, and then the natural resource community. And we are looking for more endorsements. So if your organization wants to endorse, you can do that by going to the Proposition 4 website. Next slide. So ballots drop on October 6th. So please check your voter registration status now. And when you see Proposition 4 on your ballot, please vote yes and encourage your community to do the same. And then if you know of any organization, you belong to any organization, please endorse Proposition 4 to show the widespread support for this proposition. And then we have on the Proposition 4 website, there's a toolkit, social media. You can follow the social media accounts for Prop 4 on Facebook, Instagram, X, and we also have a page on Proposition 4 on our website.